May 5th, 1811, the Spanish-Portuguese border. Wellington watched in horror as his army began to disintegrate. 4,000 French cavalry were crushing his right flank. His inexperienced 7th Division was surrounded and about to be annihilated. In minutes, his entire retreat route would be cut off. If Napoleon had been there, Wellington later admitted, we might have been beaten. This was his closest call, the battle that nearly ended his career and British hopes of defeating France on land. Marshal Masséna commanded 48,000 veterans who had conquered Europe. Wellington had just 34,000 men, weak in cavalry, facing encirclement at a village called Fuentes de Oñoro. The French plan was perfect. Wellington's position was hopeless, but the man who survived Torres Vedras wasn't finished yet. In the next few hours, Wellington would either demonstrate tactical genius that defied military logic, or watch his army die in the Spanish dust. This is the story of Wellington's narrow escape, the battle where disaster became victory through tactical brilliance and desperate courage. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're covering the Peninsular War battle that tested Wellington's tactical genius to its absolute limits, the victory that almost became his greatest defeat. But before we get to that terrifying moment when Wellington's flank collapsed, before we watch British squares fighting for survival against overwhelming cavalry, we need to understand why this battle mattered so desperately and how Wellington found himself facing impossible odds. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into Wellington's tactical brilliance, subscribe. We cover the battles where British commanders demonstrated strategic innovation under extreme pressure, the victories that built an empire through military excellence. The strategic situation in May 1811 reflected Wellington's methodical reconquest of Portugal. After surviving the winter behind the lines of Torres Vedras, Wellington had pursued Masséna's retreating army to the Portuguese frontier. The French withdrawal had been a humanitarian catastrophe. Burned villages, slaughtered civilians, and systematic destruction marked their retreat. Wellington's pursuit aimed to complete Portugal's liberation by capturing Almeida, the last major French stronghold. This frontier fortress controlled the main route between Spain and Portugal. Its fall would effectively end French occupation and secure Wellington's base for future operations into Spain. But Almeida's capture required a formal siege, and sieges were dangerous operations. They tied down armies in fixed positions, while enemy forces could concentrate for relief attempts. Wellington understood the risk, but Almeida was too important to bypass. The fortress had to fall. Masséna, meanwhile, faced career destruction if he couldn't deliver a victory. Napoleon's patience with Portuguese failures was exhausted. The Marshal needed to either relieve Almeida or inflict a decisive defeat on Wellington. Failure meant disgrace and dismissal, perhaps worse. The armies that converged on Fuentes de Oñoro represented the finest military forces of their era. Wellington's Anglo-Portuguese army numbered approximately 34,000 men, experienced, disciplined, but critically weak in cavalry. His mounted arm consisted of fewer than 1,500 sabres, inadequate for operations in the open country around Almeida. Masséna commanded 48,000 troops, including 4,500 cavalry, a 3-to-1 advantage in mounted forces that he intended to exploit. French tactics emphasised rapid movement and concentrated attacks. Their cavalry arm was particularly dangerous, consisting of veteran troopers who had charged across the battlefields of Europe. The terrain around Fuentes de Oñoro favoured neither army decisively. The village itself sat on the banks of the Dos Casas stream, its stone houses and narrow streets creating a natural strongpoint. But the surrounding countryside was rolling plain, ideal for cavalry operations and exactly the kind of ground Wellington preferred to avoid. Wellington's initial dispositions reflected his defensive preferences. He placed his main force on the ridge behind Fuentes de Oñoro, with the village itself held by light companies from his 1st and 3rd Divisions. His right flank extended toward Poco Velo, covered only by Spanish guerrillas and a handful of cavalry. The battle began on May 3rd with a French assault on the village. Masséna launched Ferré and Marchand's divisions directly against the stone houses, hoping to punch through Wellington's centre. The fighting was brutal and close range, with both sides using bayonets in the narrow streets. French numbers gradually told. They drove the Allied defenders from the lower village and advanced to the church at its heart. But Wellington's reserves, particularly the 71st Highland Light Infantry and 79th Cameron Highlanders, counter-attacked with devastating effect. The Highland troops cleared the streets with bayonet charges, driving the French back across the stream. The first day ended with Fuentes de Oñoro still in Allied hands, but at significant cost. French casualties approached 650, while Wellington lost about 250. More importantly, the action revealed the village's tactical importance. Whoever controlled Fuentes controlled the battle. May 4th passed in deceptive calm. Both commanders observed their opponents while planning decisive moves. Masséna recognized that frontal attacks on the village were too costly. His reconnaissance had identified Wellington's critical weakness, the exposed right flank near Poco Velo. French scouts reported that Wellington's right was held by Julian Sanchez's Spanish guerrillas and a few cavalry squadrons. This position was miles from Wellington's main force and appeared vulnerable to rapid encirclement. Masséna conceived an ambitious flanking manoeuvre that would exploit this weakness. The Marshal's plan was elegant and dangerous. He would move the bulk of his army, including Montbrun's massive cavalry division, secretly to his left. This force would attack Wellington's weak right flank while diversionary assaults pinned Allied forces in the village. If successful, the manoeuvre would cut Wellington off from his retreat route and destroy his army in detail. Wellington detected French preparations during the night of May 4th, 5th. His patrols reported large-scale movement in the French lines. Recognizing the threat to his right flank, Wellington dispatched his 7th Division to reinforce Poco Velo. This division was relatively inexperienced, but it was all he could spare without weakening his main position. Dawn on May 5th brought Wellington's greatest crisis as a field commander. French cavalry struck the Spanish positions at Poco Velo with overwhelming force. Sanchez's guerrillas, brave but outmatched, scattered before the charge. The 7th Division found itself isolated in open country, surrounded by thousands of French horsemen. This was the moment that defined Wellington's tactical genius. Faced with imminent disaster, he made one of the most audacious decisions in military history. Rather than attempt to reinforce the 7th Division directly, Wellington ordered a strategic withdrawal to a new defensive line. He would reshape his entire army's position while under attack. The manoeuvre was extraordinarily risky. It involved moving thousands of troops across open ground while French cavalry dominated the battlefield. One mistake would result in catastrophic defeat, but Wellington understood that saving the 7th Division required accepting this risk. The responsibility for executing this withdrawal fell to General Robert Craufurd and his famous Light Division. These troops were Wellington's elite, veterans of countless skirmishes who specialised in rapid movement and flexible tactics. If anyone could save the 7th Division, it was Craufurd's men. What followed was one of the most remarkable fighting withdrawals in military history. The Light Division formed squares, rectangular formations bristling with bayonets, and began a systematic retreat across several miles of open plain. French cavalry charged repeatedly, but disciplined musket fire broke every attack. The withdrawal required perfect coordination between infantry squares, artillery, and the handful of Allied cavalry. Each square moved in turn while others provided covering fire. Wounded men were carried inside the formations. Ammunition was redistributed under fire. The precision required was extraordinary. Captain Norman Ramsay provided the day's most heroic moment. His artillery battery had been overrun and surrounded by French cavalry. The guns appeared lost, a serious blow to Wellington's already limited firepower. But Ramsay refused to abandon his pieces. On Ramsay's command, his gunners hitched their cannons to their limbers and drew swords. Then they charged directly through the surrounding French cavalry. The weight of the gun carriages and the momentum of their horses carried them through the enemy line like a battering ram. They reached Allied lines amid cheers from the infantry squares. This action exemplified the spirit that characterised Wellington's army: individual initiative, professional competence, and absolute refusal to accept defeat combined to achieve the seemingly impossible. Ramsay's charge became legendary throughout the British Army. While the Light Division fought for survival in the plain, French forces launched their final assault on Fuentes de Oñoro village. Drouet's Fresh Division, spearheaded by grenadiers in their distinctive bearskin caps, drove deep into the stone houses. They captured most of the village and reached the church at its centre. Wellington committed his last reserve to hold the village. The 88th Connaught Rangers, Irishmen renowned for their fighting spirit, received orders to retake the lost ground. Under Colonel Wallace, they advanced without firing a shot, relying entirely on the bayonet. The fighting in Fuentes de Oñoro's narrow streets was savage beyond description. Houses changed hands multiple times. Men fought with bayonets, swords and rifle butts in rooms where black powder smoke made breathing difficult. At one point, 100 French grenadiers trapped in a dead-end street were killed to the last man. The Connaught Rangers' bayonet charge proved decisive. They cleared the French from the village and drove them back across the Dos Casas stream. Fuentes de Oñoro remained in Allied hands, but barely. The margin of victory was measured in yards and individual acts of courage. Throughout this crisis, French command failures hampered their operations. Marshal Bessières, commanding Napoleon's Imperial Guard cavalry, refused Masséna's orders to commit his elite troops. Whether from personal animosity or excessive caution about risking the Guard, Bessières kept his forces inactive during the battle's climactic moment. This refusal proved crucial. The Imperial Guard cavalry could have shattered Wellington's new defensive line or completed the destruction of the 7th Division. Instead, they watched from the sidelines while the opportunity slipped away. Masséna's fury at this insubordination was recorded by multiple witnesses. The battle's outcome reflected tactical success, masking strategic limitations. Wellington held his positions and maintained his siege of Almeida. Masséna failed to relieve the fortress or inflict decisive defeat on the Allies. By these measures, Fuentes de Oñoro was a British victory, but the costs were significant. Allied casualties totaled approximately 1,500, while French losses reached 2,200, 3,500. More importantly, the battle revealed dangerous weaknesses in Wellington's cavalry arm and the risks of fighting an open country against superior mounted forces. Wellington's own assessment was characteristically honest. He described Fuentes de Oñoro as his narrow escape and admitted that Napoleon's presence might have changed the outcome. The battle tested his tactical flexibility to its limits and taught valuable lessons about crisis management. The aftermath proved bittersweet for Wellington. His victory was tarnished by the escape of Almeida's garrison. On the night of May 10th, General Brenier led 1,300 French soldiers through Allied siege lines and blew up the fortress before escaping to French territory. This escape infuriated Wellington more than any military setback of his career. He had won the battle but lost its strategic prize. The failure of his siege arrangements became a source of lasting embarrassment and led to significant changes in his staff procedures. For Masséna, Fuentes de Oñoro marked the end of a distinguished career. Napoleon's disappointment with the Marshal's Portuguese failures led to his dismissal and replacement by Marshal Masséna. The man once known as victory's favoured child never commanded in the field again. The battle's broader significance extended beyond individual careers. Fuentes de Oñoro demonstrated that Wellington's army could survive and triumph under the most adverse conditions. The tactical flexibility displayed during the withdrawal convinced both allies and enemies that British forces were capable of matching French troops in any circumstances. The performance of multinational units proved particularly significant. Portuguese troops, Spanish guerrillas and British regulars had fought effectively together under extreme pressure. This cooperation validated Wellington's strategy of building indigenous resistance while providing professional military leadership. Technical innovations also emerged from the battle's lessons. Wellington recognised his cavalry weakness and began lobbying for reinforcements. Artillery tactics were refined based on Ramsay's heroic charge and the difficulties of supporting squares in open country. Intelligence gathering improved to prevent future surprises. The psychological impact on both armies was profound. Wellington's troops gained confidence from their narrow escape and the demonstration of their commander's tactical brilliance. French forces, despite their numerical advantages, began questioning their ability to defeat this particular opponent. Fuentes de Oñoro also marked a turning point in Peninsular war strategy. Masséna's failure convinced Napoleon that Portugal could not be conquered with available resources. French efforts increasingly focused on defensive operations rather than territorial expansion. Wellington's tactical evolution continued throughout the Peninsular campaigns, but Fuentes de Oñoro represented a crucial learning experience. The battle taught him about crisis management, the importance of tactical flexibility, and the need to prepare for unexpected developments. The village of Fuentes de Oñoro itself became a symbol of stubborn resistance. Its stone houses had witnessed some of the war's fiercest fighting. The soldiers who fought there, both Allied and French, left behind a legacy of professional competence and individual courage that inspired future generations. The artillery rescue that made Ramsay legendary deserves fuller telling. His 2 guns had been surrounded for nearly an hour. French dragoons circled the position like wolves, waiting for the crews to surrender. Through the dust and smoke, Ramsay could see his men's faces, young gunners who had never expected to die so far from home. "Sir," his sergeant called over the thunder of hooves, "we can spike the guns and run for it." Ramsay drew his sword instead. "Like hell we will. Limber up. We're charging." The order seemed insane. 6 horses, 2 heavy cannon, and 20 men against a regiment of French cavalry. But Ramsay's crews had served under fire from Corunna to Torres Vedras. They trusted their captain's judgment, even when logic said otherwise. The moment they hitched the guns to their limbers, French dragoons spotted the movement. Sabres flashed in the afternoon sun as hundreds of horsemen spurred toward the isolated battery. Ramsay's drivers whipped their horses into a gallop just as the enemy charge reached them. What followed defied military possibility. The gun carriages, each weighing over a ton, smashed through the French line like battering rams. Horses screamed and fell. Dragoons scattered as the massive wheels crushed everything in their path. Ramsay rode beside his guns, sword in hand, cutting down any Frenchman who came too close. The weight and momentum carried them through. Behind them, French officers sat their horses in stunned silence, watching 2 British cannons disappear into their own infantry squares. The impossible had become reality through sheer audacity and British determination. Meanwhile, the infantry squares fighting for survival on the plain experienced terror and triumph in equal measure. Inside the 52nd Light Infantry's formation, Private Harris felt the ground shake as French cavalry approached. 4 ranks deep, bayonets fixed, 300 men formed a bristling wall of steel around their colours. "Steady, lads," called Captain Mitchell. "Let them come close." The dragoons thundered closer. Harris could see their faces now, moustaches, scars, eyes wild with battle fury. His hands shook as he gripped his musket. Around him, veterans checked their flints and adjusted their aim. Present. The first rank knelt, muskets levelled. The second rank stood behind them, barrels protruding between their comrades' heads. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and they'd waste their volley. Too late, and the cavalry would be among them. Fire! Orange flame erupted from 200 muskets. Horses crashed down in tangled heaps. Riders flew through the air. The front rank of dragoons simply ceased to exist, swept away by disciplined British firepower. But more kept coming. Wave after wave of French cavalry charged the squares. Each attack was broken by musket volleys, but ammunition ran low, and wounded men filled the formation's centres. Hour after hour, the squares held their ground through professional discipline and mutual trust. The village fighting reached its climax when the 88th Connaught Rangers received their orders to retake Fuentes de Oñoro. Colonel Wallace gathered his men in the street below the French positions. These Irishmen had fought from Egypt to the peninsula, earning their reputation with blood and steel. General Picton, his voice carrying over the noise of battle, delivered the order that became regimental legend. Rangers of Connaught, it is not my intention to expend any powder this evening. We'll do this business with the cold iron. The Rangers fixed bayonets without a word. No cheering, no war cries, just the metallic click of steel locking into place. These men understood what cold iron meant. House-to-house fighting with 18-inch blades. No quarter given or expected. They advanced up the narrow street in silence. French grenadiers, secure behind stone walls and barricaded doorways, waited with loaded muskets. The first volley knocked down a dozen Irishmen, but the rest kept coming. They reached the houses and the slaughter began. Fighting raged room by room. Men died with bayonets through their chests, crushed by rifle butts, or torn apart by point-blank musket fire. In one basement, 20 Rangers cornered 30 French soldiers. When the smoke cleared, no Frenchman remained alive. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Murphy led 6 men over the rooftops, dropping through windows behind French positions. Attacked from front and rear simultaneously, the grenadiers broke. They ran for the stream, leaving behind their wounded and their pride. Wallace's Rangers had cleared the village in 30 minutes of the bloodiest fighting seen in the peninsula. Their casualties were severe, but they had proven that disciplined infantry with cold steel could overcome any defence when properly led and motivated. The aftermath brought Wellington face to face with his greatest frustration of the entire war. The siege of Almeida had been the battle's whole purpose. He had won the field, broken Masséna's attack, and secured Portugal, but the strategic prize slipped away in darkness. On the night of May 10th, as Allied sentries dozed at their posts, General Brenier gathered his 1,300 defenders for a desperate escape. They had been trapped in Almeida for weeks, surviving on horse meat and hope. Now their only choice was death or a mad dash through enemy lines. Brenier led them out through the magazine, where barrels of gunpowder waited to destroy the fortress. His plan was simple: blow up everything the British wanted and escape in the confusion. At midnight, the explosion lit the sky for miles. Wellington was awakened by the blast. Racing to his headquarters window, he saw Almeida's walls collapsing in flames. Even as he watched, British pickets reported large formations moving toward the river. Brenier's garrison was escaping under cover of the explosion. "God damn them!" Wellington raged, pounding his fist on the table. "How did they get past our lines?" His staff officers had no answers. The siege arrangements that should have prevented any escape had failed completely. The failure haunted Wellington more than any battlefield defeat. He had outsmarted Masséna, saved his army from destruction, and proven British tactical superiority, only to watch his strategic objective literally blow up in his face. The escaped garrison represented more than military failure. It was personal humiliation for a general who prided himself on meticulous planning. For the soldiers who survived Fuentes de Oñoro, the battle became a touchstone of professional pride. They had faced the worst France could offer and emerged victorious through discipline, courage, and tactical flexibility. Veterans would speak of the day we saved the army for the rest of their lives. The village itself bore the scars of 3 days' fighting. Stone houses showed bullet holes and cannon damage. The stream ran red for hours after the final French withdrawal. Local civilians emerged from hiding to find their homes destroyed but their homeland secured. Wellington's tactical genius at Fuentes de Oñoro established principles that would guide British military thinking for generations. The battle proved that defensive flexibility could overcome numerical disadvantage when combined with professional competence and individual heroism. If this is the kind of military history that interests you, then you know what to do. These are the campaigns that built legends through blood, steel, and unbreakable determination. Thank you for watching Britain's history. The battles that demonstrated British tactical brilliance and fighting spirit told the way they deserve to be remembered.